Hello everyone, Jennifer Maker here. It's a beautiful day to try a new technique, etching glass with color. Now we've made similar etch projects together and I love the simplicity of etched glass. But many of you have asked me, how can I add color to my etched glass and make the etching stand out more? This is an excellent question, and I also wanted to know. So we experimented with several different techniques, and I'm sharing our results with you today. I'll also share my best tips for adding color to etched glass using 3 different products. Each one creates a different effect, so you can easily customize your projects. So let's go over to my craft table, and I'll show you everything that you need to etch glass with color just like this. Here are all the materials and tools that we'll need to etch glass with color. To start, we need a glass item, of course, like this wine glass. Now, it's important that your glass not contain any borosilicate, as that won't work for etching. So some casserole dishes from IKEA and some other brands of dishes may be made of borosilicate glass, which is a tougher type of glass. If you see a note that your glass is very scratch and impact resistant to withstand, rapid temperature changes, it's possible it may not work to etch correctly. I'm going to use the 20-ounce wine glass for my materials list for this tutorial, but of course you're welcome to use anything that you have that's glass. And to etch our glass, we're going to use Armor Etch. This is a specially formulated liquid that can permanently etch glass. And as you can imagine, that means we need to be very careful using it. Safety is always important when crafting because we never want to hurt ourselves making something beautiful. Always research the correct workspace and personal protective equipment for your project. Make sure you have it all ready before you begin, just as I have here. Now, if we're using Armor Etch, that means we need a well-ventilated space with a sturdy work surface. Cover your surface with a few layers of butcher paper to protect it, just as I have here. And an outside workspace works well too if you have one. You'll also need access to running water to rinse off the cream when it's done etching. And a kitchen timer like my cute little ladybug here is also really helpful to keep track of the etching time. I also recommend a lint-free cloth or coffee filter and some rubbing alcohol to prep the glass, and 1 or 2 lint rollers for an awesome tip I'm going to share later. Paper towels, a marker, and some painter's tape are also useful. For personal protection, you'll need non-latex gloves, an apron, a well-fitting respirator with the correct cartridge, and eye protection. This may seem like a lot, but safety is the most important part of crafting with chemicals. Once you've invested in safety equipment, it will last you for many projects. I want you to stay safe. Now for this etching project, we'll want to create a stencil using permanent vinyl, like this little M here. Any color of vinyl is fine as long as the piece is a bit larger than your design. You'll also need some standard grip transfer tape, a weeding tool, a scraper, and a fabric measuring tape. Now I'm using the Cricut Maker 3 to cut out my stencil, but you can use any cutting machine. If you're making a small design, like this one, you can even use the Cricut Joy. Just have a green standard grip machine mat and a fine point blade ready. And of course, we need something that we can use to add color to the etching. As I mentioned, we tested 3 different options: oil-based paint pens, water-based paint markers, and something called Rub and Buff. And you definitely want to stick around to the end when I will share my favorite one with you. So let me show you where to find the free stencil designs for today's tutorial, and then we will get started. Step 1. Get my free stencil designs. First, go to jennifermaker.com/380 and look for libraries in the red bar at the top. And then either click Get a Password if you don't yet have one, or click Enter the library. In the library, you can find the design files by searching the page for design number 380. Click the link to download a zip file with SVG files for cutting on a Cricut or another cutting machine, and DXF files. There are also printable PDFs if you want to cut your stencils by hand with a craft knife. The folder includes 3 stencil designs, one for a vase, another for a plate, and a third for a wine glass. I'll show you how to customize and cut the wine glass stencil on a Cricut cutting machine. You can use almost the exact same steps for the vase and the dish stencils. I'll mention when you should do anything different for them. First, upload the wine glass SVG cut file to Cricut Design Space and add it to your canvas. If you're unsure how to do this, go to jennifermaker.com/svgs to learn how to unzip and upload files. Here's what my monogram stencil looks like on the canvas without a letter added. It may look strange if you haven't made a stencil before, but that's okay. I'll show you a few tips that will make stencils a breeze. You may want to zoom in or out in order to see the full design. Click the minus or plus sign in the lower left corner of the screen. You can use these buttons to zoom in and out on your canvas as needed. Step 2. Customize the stencil design. Right now, the design is perfectly sized for the 20-ounce wine glass linked in my materials list, but you can adjust it for a different glass. The stencil will create a design that is about 2 inches square on your glass. You might lose details if you make it smaller, but increasing the size for a larger item is easy. Simply drag the resizing tool on the lower right-hand side of the bounding box, or just enter your desired dimensions under Size in the top menu. Make sure to keep the lock icon closed to maintain the correct proportions. If you need help resizing an SVG in Cricut Design Space, you can check out my resizing guide at jennifermaker.com/resizesvg. I explain exactly what you need to do to resize any design to fit your needs. I'm going to leave the design the size just as it is for this project, so I'll click the undo arrow. Now let's customize the design with a letter. Adding a letter to a design takes a few steps, and I'll walk you through it. In the left menu, click the text icon and add a text box to the canvas. Without clicking anywhere else, type in your letter. I'll type M for Maker. Design Space uses Cricut Sans for any new text layers, but let's look at our font options. With the letter still selected, click the box that says Cricut Sans under Font in the top menu. Your font options will come up and may look different than mine, and that's okay. If you know the font you want to use, type it into the search bar and select it. If you're not sure, I have some tips for picking a font. If you need any help filtering and finding the best fonts, get my Cricut Font Finder cheat sheet at jennifermaker.com/Cricut Fonts list. So let's filter our options a bit. Uncheck the box next to Only Current Fonts to add more options. Then click All to show every font available to you. Finally, click on Filters and check the box next to Single Layer, since we don't want to deal with any layers for this project. When you're looking at options, make sure there isn't a price listed next to the name to avoid being charged when you go to cut the design. For this project, I recommend using a font without tiny details or very thin lines, since we don't want the etching cream to spread beyond our stencil edges. Scroll through and click a font to see how your letter looks in the new style. If you click off of the letter, select it again and click the name under Font to open up your options again. Keep trying fonts until you find the one you like. I'm going to use Times New Roman, but definitely use a font that fits your style. Now we need to cut the letter out of the existing design. Our Align and Slice tools will help us cut one shape out of another in the correct spot. Select both the letter and design layers. In the top menu, click Align and select Center to place the letter in the center of the original design. Click the letter and resize it to fit your design. You can also click and drag the letter until you like where it fits in the design. Make sure your letter doesn't get too close to the leaves, or your stencil may tear. Now select both layers and click Slice below the Layers panel. See the 3 layers under Slice results in our Layers panel? Click and delete the 2 layers just showing letters, leaving your custom stencil on the canvas. You did it! If you're happy with the stencil, you're almost ready to cut. If not, just use your undo arrow in the top menu in the far left and try the process again. Practice is always good. Now select the correct machine in the top menu and click Make It to move to the Prepare screen. A pop-up window might appear asking you how you want to load your materials. If it does, select On Mat and click Continue, unless of course you're using Smart Vinyl. On the Prepare screen, make sure your design is on one mat. Do not mirror your wine glass design, since we need our letter to face the right way on the glass surface. However, if you're making the plate project, you will need to mirror your design. Since it's not safe to etch and color a surface you might eat off of, the mirrored stencil goes on the underside of the plate. That way you can read the words while safely using the plate. Okay, back to our wine glass stencil. Click Continue to move to the Make screen. I'm using permanent vinyl, so I'll select Premium Vinyl Permanent Glossy for my base material. I always change my pressure to more for a cleaner cut. Put your vinyl shiny side up on your machine mat, making sure the piece is large enough for your design. Refer back to Cricut Design Space if you're unsure. Use a brayer to get the vinyl as smooth as possible. Then load the mat into your Cricut and press the flashing button to begin cutting. When the cut is complete, unload the machine mat and leave the design on your mat to make weeding easier in the next step. Step 3, prepare the glass and stencil. Okay, so first let's prep our glass. This will really improve your stencil results. Wipe the surface with a lint-free cloth or coffee filter and some rubbing alcohol to remove any dust or oils that will make the vinyl stick less. Then avoid handling the glass with bare hands after that. Let the glass dry while you weed your design. Weeding a stencil is the opposite of most traditional vinyl projects. Since we want the etching cream to create the design, we need the vinyl to protect the area between and around our letter and decoration. So instead of removing the vinyl around the letter and design, use your weeding tool to remove the letter and design themselves. Be sure to leave the centers of any letters in place. If they accidentally come out while weeding, which can totally happen, just put them back in place carefully. Remove the vinyl around the circle to make placing it easier. Now we can remove the weeded design from the mat. Flip the machine mat over onto your workspace and gently bend it to release the vinyl and its carrier sheet, keeping the design as flat as possible. We'll use transfer tape to move the stencil from the carrier sheet to the glass. Cut a piece of standard grip transfer tape just a bit larger than your stencil and remove the backing. Now it's time to use my taco method. This is my favorite way to apply vinyl or transfer tape precisely and smoothly. Hold the transfer tape sticky side down over your design. Bend the sides up to make a taco or a U shape. Lower the bottom of the taco onto the middle of your stencil. Smooth the transfer tape over the vinyl from the center outward to minimize wrinkles and bubbles. With the transfer tape in place, run a scraper tool or another hard and flat-edged item like a store loyalty card all over the project's front and back with medium pressure. This is called burnishing, and it's so important. Burnishing encourages the transfer tape to stick to the shiny side of the vinyl, moving the stencil from the backing paper to the tape. Then flip your design over and remove the paper backing from the vinyl. If your stencil is still sticking to the backing paper, replace the transfer tape and burnish again. Applying your stencil nice and straight can be difficult, but a little preparation now will help. Here's a great tip. Draw a horizontal line across the upper part of your transfer tape with a ruler and marker. If you aligned your Cricut transfer tape nice and straight on the stencil, you may be able to use the horizontal grid lines instead. Then you can position your horizontal line so that it's parallel with the top of your glass to apply the decal nice and straight. Step 4. Apply the stencil to the glass. Applying vinyl to the curved surface of a wine glass can be tricky, but I have a great tip that makes it so much easier. Before you apply the vinyl, cut small slits around the outside edge of the transfer tape. This allows the transfer tape and vinyl to bend around the glass and curve to the surface as it is applied to prevent bubbles and creasing. This is super important for an etching project because you don't want any of the cream to get under the vinyl. And don't worry, if you accidentally snip the edge of the vinyl, it's perfectly fine. Just don't cut too close to the design. To keep your glass in place while you apply the vinyl, here's another tip that I just love. You can use 1 or 2 lint rollers on either side of your glass to hold it steady. A roll of tape on its side also does the trick. Do whatever works best for you. Fold your design up in the taco shape again over the glass and lay the middle of the design down on your glass, gently smoothing it from the middle outward. Take your time with this. Remember to use your parallel lines if you drew them. Now remove the transfer tape. It will come off in strips since we cut the edges. If some of the vinyl comes up with the transfer tape, just push it back down, burnish it with your fingers, and try again. Check your vinyl to be certain all areas around the design are adhered well to the glass. Again, this step is so important as it will stop your etching cream from bleeding into areas that you don't want to etch. Just go around all parts of the design with your fingers and push the vinyl down well, removing any bubbles or creases as best you can. If you have a detailed stencil or are having trouble with bubbles, using the wet method to apply your vinyl might be a better way to go. I have a whole video tutorial that explains exactly how to use this method on my blog. You can find it at jennifermaker.com/wetvinylmethod. Okay, once the stencil is on your glass and before applying the etching cream, cover the glass around your stencil with painter's tape just in case any of the etching cream spreads. It's a good idea to cover most of the outer surface to avoid etching accidents during handling or rinsing too. And if you aren't already in a well-ventilated space or outside, it's time to move and prepare to etch. Gather your supplies so you don't have to move around a lot in your protective equipment. You'll need your armor edge, butcher paper, a timer set for 3 minutes, and a disposable paintbrush. Don't use a foam brush as you won't get as good of results. Make sure to read the etching cream's instructions and guidance on accidental exposure before proceeding. Etching cream is caustic and you don't want to inhale its fumes, get it on your skin or in your eyes. And before opening the etching cream, put on your safety equipment. Make sure your respirator's cartridge is good, the mask and eye protection fit well, and your clothing is protected. Put on your gloves and cover your work surface with butcher paper. Remember, safety first. Now shake or stir your etching cream really well before you open it. You can pour some cream in a disposable bowl, but I just scoop it out of the bottle with my brush. Any cream we don't use can be put back in the container to be used again, so don't be shy. Apply the cream to the glass through the stencil cutouts. Once you've added enough cream, brush it around for about 3 minutes. Use your timer if you'd like, just be careful not to get the etching cream on anything important like your phone. Brush the cream up and down, side to side, and diagonally. Keep the cream moving around the whole design, getting it into every nook and cranny. After the 3 minutes are up, apply more cream in areas where it looks thinned out, and then let it sit for another 5 to 10 minutes. Letting the etching cream sit on the glass for longer creates a more uniform and deeper etch. This works especially well in larger areas, such as the vase design. When the time is up, it's time to remove the etching cream. Keep your protective equipment on. If you used a lot of cream, scrape it back into the container to be reused. Rinse the remaining cream off of the glass under running water. Be sure to get all of the etching cream off before you remove the vinyl. You don't want to accidentally touch the cream or get it on your work surface. Now dry the glass well with your lint-free cloth and remove the painter's tape and stencil. You may need to use your weeding tool or scraper to remove any vinyl that can't be picked off by hand. Just don't scratch the glass. Give the glass a final rinse after you've removed all of the stencil and let it dry off. Step 5. Color your etched design. Now, what we've all been waiting for, color. Our glass looks nice just as it is, but I think some color would really make this project special. I tried 3 different ways to add color to etched glass. I used oil-based paint pens, water-based paint pens, and rub and buff. In case you're not familiar with rub and buff, it's a paste that comes in a tube and it's made up of waxes derived from the leaves of a Brazilian palm tree, metallic powders, and pigments that can be applied on a variety of surfaces. So let me show you how I applied the color to the etching, and then I will tell you which option I liked best. So first, oil-based paint pens on an etched wine glass. So first I'll use oil-based paint pens. Grab the pens in the colors you want. I'm using red, green, and yellow. You'll also need some scrap paper, paper towels, and your rubbing alcohol. And here's a tip before you get started. If you're using more than one color, you can use painter's tape to protect the areas that you're not painting. Oil-based paint pens take a little preparation to work well, especially if they're new. Take your first pen and shake it very well. Remove the cap and push the tip straight down on a piece of scrap paper several times until the paint starts to flow. It may take up to a minute before the paint starts flowing, and some pens will take longer than others. Once your pens are ready, we'll color in the design and quickly wipe away the excess before it dries, essentially buffing the color into the etched design as we go to create a beautiful stained glass effect. With one color at a time, color the desired areas of your etched design. I found that this technique works best if you only color very small areas at a time because you want to wipe away the excess paint while it's still wet. When you're coloring, it's okay if you get some paint outside the edges of your design. We'll be wiping that off in the next step. Alright, so next, wipe the excess paint away with a dry paper towel. The paint will smear as you wipe, but it can be easily removed with your paper towel. You'll need to apply some pressure in order to buff the paint into the etched areas and remove all of the excess from the clear glass. As you wipe, you'll notice the paint that stays in the etched areas will lighten in color. This is okay, and it's actually the effect that we're going for. The lighter color allows us to see the shimmery pattern that the etching created and gives us that stained glass look. You may need to try this method a few times to get the best results. The amount of time that you'll need to wait before wiping the excess paint away will depend on the amount of paint that you used and your local humidity. I found that I only needed to wait a few seconds, about the time it took to put the cap back on the pen and set it down beside me. If your paint dries and is hard to wipe off with a paper towel, it can be wiped away with a damp paper towel. Just don't apply too much pressure to the etched areas because it may wipe away the color that you want to keep. You can also easily remove smeared paint from unwanted areas with rubbing alcohol applied to a Q-tip or a paper towel. To set your oil paint glass coloring and make it permanent, just bake it in an oven. I recommend baking it at 350 degrees Fahrenheit for 1 hour. Technique 2. Rub and buff on a glass plate. Another option is rub and buff, which is actually a type of wax that has metallic powder and pigments added to it. You'll need clean gloves, a dry paper towel, and rubbing alcohol for this technique. I use this on the underside of a glass plate. Apply a tiny amount of rub and buff to your gloved finger and rub it into the etched design. Then buff it into the etched areas with the dry paper towel. You can wipe the excess off of the plain glass, but the wax dries quickly, so you may need to dampen your paper towel. If it's really stubborn, try a bit of rubbing alcohol. You can always add more as you go, but with this product, you will find a little goes a long way. What do you think? To make your rub and buff glass coloring permanent, be sure to wait until it is completely dry before you wash it or anything like that. And that can take at least several hours, depending on how much you used and your conditions. Technique 3. water-based markers on an etched vase. Lastly, we tried water-based markers on this pretty etched vase using the third design. The water-based markers are prepared the same way as the oil-based pens. Just shake each pen well, remove the cap, and push the tip straight down on a piece of scrap paper several times until the paint starts to flow. Then you can paint your etched design using one color at a time. But you don't have to buff the color into the etched glass. You just pick your colors and fill in the etched areas. I didn't need to use painter's tape on this design because the elements were more spread out. I found that because these markers are water-based, the color can be easily removed with a wet paper towel even after it has dried. I also wasn't able to get the color to stay in the etched areas when wiping it with a paper towel, like I did with the oil-based pens. Because I wasn't able to wipe away the excess paint, I found that it was difficult to stay within the outlines of the etched design when painting. This created a design that wasn't as polished as I did hope for. You may get different results if you decide to try these markers yourself. So here are all the finished pieces. After trying all three types of coloring methods, my favorite is the rub and buff, which you can see on this plate and the wine glass and the vase. I really love how beautiful the metallic color looks on the glass and how easy it was to apply. It also stayed in the etched areas even after hand washing it several times. For a fun effect, try combining the pretty metallic colors of the rub and buff finish with the bright colors of the oil-based paint pens. The rub and buff also comes in different colors and can be used on lots of different surfaces. As with most projects, the correct care and handling of your etched glass items is very important. All of these projects require gentle hand washing, and the colored etching is not food safe. So it's fine to put it on the outside of a wine glass like this, but not on the surface of a plate if you intend for food to come in contact with it. I also recommend you avoid microwaves just to be on the safe side. So plan your projects accordingly. You can now give your customized wine glass, vase, or dinner plate as a gift to a friend or family member to brighten their day. The wine glasses make awesome wedding gifts, and the plate is great for sharing sweet treats at a get-together. You can also use any of these items in your own home for a colorful addition to your dinnerware or decor. You could even use the vase to show off some custom paper flowers like I've done over here on this side. Now, if you have any questions about color etching on glass, these designs, other crafts, or pretty much anything craft related, let me know. Leave your question below this video or ask over at our Cricut Crafters group at jennifermaker.com/CricutCrafters. I love to help and see you succeed. And that's it for today. Until next time, this is Jennifer Maker reminding you to craft a life you love. Drink this now?
Only if you do it all in one gulp. So good?
Can I have a sip?
You can have whatever you want. I'm just filming it is all, so.